The first text came in at 12:38 a.m., right when I was standing in the back hallway of the Hawthorne Marquee with a trash bag in one hand and a ring of theater keys in the other, trying to convince a 100-year-old building to stop making noises like it had opinions. The message was from Marinvale, which was already strange enough to make me forget the trash bag. Marin did not text me after midnight anymore. Not since she got engaged, not since her life filled up with hotel tastings, venue walkthroughs, color palettes, and Brennan Shaw smiling beside her in photos like a man who had been designed by a luxury watch company. Her message said only, "You awake?" I stared at it too long. Long enough for one of the stagehands to call from the loading dock and ask if I had discovered religion back there. I told him no, just trouble, and typed back. Unfortunately, 3 dots appeared, vanished, appeared again, then stopped. That was Marin in a crisis. Even her panic tried to be polite. By the time I locked the theater and walked the 6 blocks to my apartment, Portland had gone damp and silver under the streetlights. Not raining exactly, just misting with the kind of persistence that made every surface feel like it was holding a grudge. I called her once, but it went to voicemail. I told myself not to make that mean anything. I told myself a lot of things where Marin was concerned, and most of them had the structural integrity of a cardboard chair. She and I had grown up 2 streets apart, which meant I had known her through braces, bad bangs, debate trophies, her mother's lemon bars, my father's disappearing acts, and every version of heartbreak she had tried to laugh her way through. I had also known, with painful clarity, that knowing someone forever did not mean they would ever choose you. Sometimes it only meant they knew exactly where to come when the life they chose became too heavy for one night. She was sitting on the front steps of my building when I turned the corner. At first, I only saw the coat, camel-colored and too expensive for my cracked concrete entrance, then the bare ankles beneath it, then the silver heels hanging from 2 fingers like evidence from a crime scene. Marin looked up when she heard me, and for half a second I saw the girl who used to climb the maple tree behind my garage because she said rooftops were too obvious. Then she smiled, and the adult version returned too quickly. Polished, graceful, controlled. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever careful shape it had been in earlier, and the dress under the coat looked like it belonged in a room full of champagne and people pretending not to judge each other. "Before you say anything," she said. "Yes, I know this is dramatic. I was hoping to arrive with more dignity, but the train schedule was not emotionally supportive." I stopped 2 steps below her and tried not to look as relieved as I felt. "You missed the last train?" I asked, even though the answer was obvious. She lifted one heel and let it swing from her finger. Technically, the last train and I had a disagreement about timing. That sounds like missing it. That sounds like victim-blaming public transportation. Her joke landed, but barely. Marin's mouth curved, then trembled at one corner before she caught it. I noticed because I had spent most of my life noticing things about her I had no right to keep. "Where's Brennan?" I asked. And there it was, the name between us, clean and sharp as a glass edge. Her eyes shifted past me toward the dark street, probably somewhere with valet parking and an opinion. She said it lightly, but her shoulders were too high, and she had wrapped the coat tight around herself, even though the night was not that cold. I looked at her left hand. The engagement ring was still there, catching the weak porch light like it wanted credit for surviving the evening. I should have asked better questions outside. I should have kept the line clear, the way decent men are supposed to when a woman wearing another man's ring shows up after midnight with wet eyes and no ride home. Instead, I took out my keys and said, "Come upstairs before my neighbors start forming theories." Marin stood, then immediately winced because one foot had fallen asleep. I reached for her elbow without thinking. She let me steady her for 1 second, maybe 2, then pulled herself together with a quiet little breath that hurt more than crying would have. "Still rescuing unstable women from sidewalks, Mercer?" she asked. "Only on weekdays. It's Saturday. Then you owe me overtime." That got a real laugh out of her, small but alive, and I hated how much it did to me. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, above a bakery that made cinnamon rolls at dawn and plumbing sounds at random. Marin had been there before, but not often in the last few years. Engagement changed the geography of friendships. Places that once felt harmless started needing explanations. She stepped inside like she remembered the old version of the room and was surprised to find it still existed. The narrow kitchen, the books stacked beside the radiator, the framed blueprint of the hawthorn marquee above the couch, the chipped blue mug on the open shelf near the sink. Her gaze stopped there. I wished I had hidden it. "You still have that?" she asked. I shrugged and took off my coat, because doing anything with my hands was safer than answering honestly. "It holds liquids. I'm sentimental about function. I gave you that when we were 19. Then it has held liquids heroically for 15 years. She walked to the shelf and touched the mug with one finger, not lifting it, just confirming it was real. That small movement did something dangerous to the room. It reminded me that there had been a time when Marin belonged in my kitchen without explanation, when she would raid my cereal, steal my hoodies during movie nights, and fall asleep on my couch while insisting she was wide awake. Back then, I had mistaken proximity for possibility. Eventually, I learned the difference. I filled the kettle and reached for the tea tin behind the coffee, the jasmine one she used to drink when she was pretending not to be anxious. Marin noticed. Of course she did. "You keep jasmine tea?" she asked. "I keep options. You hate jasmine tea. That's why it lasts." Her face softened, and I had to turn toward the stove before that softness found somewhere weak in me. Brennan called while the kettle heated. His name lit up her phone on my counter, elegant and unavoidable. Marin looked at it, then looked away. The phone buzzed itself into silence. A moment later, it started again. This time she reached for it, not to answer, but to press the side button until the screen went dark. I said nothing, which took more effort than I wanted to admit. She sat on the edge of my couch, still in the coat, still holding herself like someone might ask her to justify taking up space. I brought her tea in the chipped mug, and she accepted it with both hands. "I know what this looks like," she said. "What does it look like?" I asked. She gave me a tired smile, like a woman in formal wear making one very bad decision after another. I sat in the chair across from her because the couch felt too close and too honest. "Marin, showing up somewhere safe is not automatically a bad decision." She stared into the tea. For a while, the only sounds were the radiator clicking and the city hissing outside the window. Then she said Brennan had hosted a dinner at one of the boutique hotels she consulted for, that it was supposed to be casual, which in Brennan's language meant everyone wore jackets and used the word intentional too much. She tried to laugh when she told me that part, but her voice kept thinning. He had corrected her in front of people twice, once about a campaign she had designed and once about the wedding date, as if she were a charming assistant who had misplaced the facts of her own life. When I asked if they had fought, she shook her head. "That's the thing," she said. "We don't fight. He refines. He reframes. He makes everything sound reasonable until I feel unreasonable for having a pulse." I felt my hand tighten around the arm of the chair. Anger came easily. Wanting to protect her came even easier. But both of those were dangerous, because neither one answered the question she had actually brought into my apartment. So I asked the simplest thing I could. "Why didn't you call him when you missed the train?" Marin looked up then, and the polished mask finally slipped far enough for me to see the exhaustion underneath. "Because Brennan would have told me what I should do," she said. "He would have ordered a car, called it handled, and by morning the story would be that I got overwhelmed and he fixed it." Her fingers tightened around the old mug. "I came here because you wouldn't start with what I should do." She swallowed, and when she looked at me again, the room felt smaller than it had any right to feel. "You would ask me what I wanted." I did not answer right away, partly because Marin had just said something too honest for 12:58 inches the morning, and partly because there are sentences that open doors you thought you had locked years ago. I had spent a long time convincing myself that what I felt for her had settled into something manageable, something with dust on it, something harmless enough to keep on a shelf beside the chipped mug and the old ticket stubs. But Marin, sitting on my couch in an expensive coat, holding tea I kept only for her, telling me I was the person who would ask what she wanted, made the old thing in my chest lift its head like it had only been pretending to sleep. So I did what I always did when a feeling got too close. I made myself useful. I asked if she wanted a blanket, And when she gave me a look, I added that my apartment was professionally terrible at temperature regulation. She said that sounded like something a man said when he was avoiding a question, and I told her it was actually something a man said when his radiator was built during the Roosevelt administration. "Which Roosevelt?" she asked, and I said, "Exactly." That got another laugh out of her. But this one faded slower, like she was sorry to let it go. She finally slipped out of the coat and folded it over the arm of the couch with the care of someone handling a borrowed identity. Under it, the dress was dark blue, simple and expensive, the kind of dress meant to look effortless after someone had spent real money making sure it did. She had always been good at that, making effort disappear. At 17, she could study for 6 hours and then pretend she had barely opened the book. At 24, she could cry in my passenger seat after a breakup, then walk into a birthday dinner 10 minutes later and make everyone believe she was fine because she had decided the room did not deserve the truth. I had loved that about her once, then hated it, then learned to fear it a little, because if Marin could hide pain that well, she could also hide happiness, desire, doubt, and every other thing a man like me was foolish enough to look for. She caught me watching her smooth the coat. "What?" she asked. I said nothing. She narrowed her eyes. "Callum Mercer, you have known me too long to lie with your face." I told her I was just trying to figure out whether that coat had its own tax bracket, and she smiled like she knew I had changed the subject on purpose. She stood and wandered the room with the mug in both hands, not snooping exactly, because Marin had never snooped. She investigated with charm and expected the world to forgive her. Her eyes moved over the blueprint of the theater, the row of houseplants I had kept alive through stubbornness more than affection, the stack of maintenance invoices on my small dining table, and then the narrow bookshelf near the window. "You still have my copy of East of Eden," she said. "Technically, you abandoned it here in 2015. I lent it to you. You wrote 'Return this or suffer' on the inside cover. That sounds like lending." I reached for it before I could stop myself, opened the front, and there it was in her younger handwriting, bossy and slanted and alive. Marin Vale, property of herself, temporarily trusted to Callum. She took one step closer and read over my hand. The smell of her perfume was faint now beneath the damp night air, something clean and warm that made the apartment feel less like mine. "I can't believe you kept this," she said, and her voice had gone careful. I closed the book too quickly. "It's a good book, Callum." "Fine." It threatened me. I took it seriously. For a few minutes, we let the joke protect us. That had always been our oldest habit. When we were kids, humor was the bridge across everything we did not know how to name. Her parents could be shouting in the kitchen. My father could be 3 days into one of his disappearances. School could feel like a hallway full of people who had received instructions we missed, and Marin would still find some ridiculous sentence to throw between us so neither of us had to admit we were scared. I remembered walking her home after sophomore winter formal because her date had gotten drunk behind the gym and told everyone she was too intense. I remembered her marching beside me in silver shoes, furious and trying not to cry, while I carried her corsage in my coat pocket because she said flowers did not deserve to be punished for male stupidity. I remembered wanting to take her hand and not doing it because I had already understood, even then, that being trusted was not the same as being wanted. In my apartment, 15 years later, she touched the spine of the book and said, "You always act like the things you did were small." I shrugged. Most of them were. She looked at me then, really looked, and said they were only small to me because I never had to be the person who needed them. That sentence landed too close, so I went to the kitchen and rinsed a spoon that did not need rinsing. Marin followed me with her eyes, but she let me retreat, which was its own kind of mercy. Her phone lit up again on the counter, not with a call this time, but a text. I did not mean to read it. I saw only because the screen faced up and Brennan Shaw had the kind of name that made itself visible. The message said, "Your parents are expecting us at brunch at 11. Let me know when you're done taking space." There was nothing openly cruel in it. That was the genius of men like Brennan. He could make a cage out of reasonable words and leave no fingerprints on the bars. Marin saw me see it. Her face changed, not dramatically, not enough for anyone at a dinner party to notice, but enough for me. The small looseness she had found in my apartment disappeared. Her shoulders straightened. Her mouth settled into the polite line I had seen in engagement photos. I hated that I recognized the moment she put herself back on. "You don't have to explain it to me," I said, even though part of me wanted every detail, every crack in the perfect glass house he had built around her. She gave a small laugh without humor. "That's new." "What is?" "Someone not making me present evidence before they believe I'm tired." She set the mug down and leaned against the counter, suddenly looking younger and older at the same time. "He isn't awful in the way people understand awful. That's what makes me sound ungrateful when I try to explain it. Brennan remembers reservations, sends flowers to my mother, knows which fork to use, calls my work brilliant when it helps the room like him. He doesn't yell. He doesn't slam doors. He just corrects the shape of everything until it fits him better." I stayed quiet because she was talking herself toward the thing, and I had learned long ago that if you reached too soon for Marin's truth, she would hand you a joke instead. She rubbed her thumb over the place where the ring sat. "Tonight, I described a campaign I built from scratch, and he interrupted to say what I meant was that I supported the client's vision. Everyone laughed because he smiled when he said it. I laughed too. That's the part I keep thinking about." I laughed. I wanted to say his name like a curse. I wanted to tell her that nobody who loved her should make her apologize for being vivid. I wanted to ask why she had said yes to him, but I knew that was an unfair question because people say yes to all kinds of things when they are tired of wanting something uncertain. Instead, I said, "You were trying to survive the room." Marin's eyes flicked to mine, and the relief in them was so quick it almost broke me. "Yes," she whispered. Then she looked away as if she had admitted too much. "God, I hate that you can still do that." "Do what?" Translate me without making me feel ridiculous. I laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Marin, I have been fluent in you since we were 13. The second I said it, I regretted it. Not because it was untrue, but because it was too true." The apartment went quiet around us. Her lips parted slightly, and for 1 second the years between us did not feel like years. They felt like a hallway we were both standing in, pretending there were no doors. I broke first. Of course I did. I reached for the mug and said she should try to sleep for a few hours before brunch became another battlefield. She blinked once, like she had expected something else from me, and was disappointed to be right about what I chose instead. "You can take my room," I told her. "Fresh sheets, door locks if that makes you feel better. I'll sleep out here." Marin stared at me as if I had just handed her a form to sign. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Turning yourself into furniture." I tried to smile. "Useful furniture?" "Callum." Her voice was soft, but it cut straight through the joke. I leaned back against the counter, suddenly aware of how close she was, of the ring on her hand, of the old book on the shelf, of every memory in the room standing up and paying attention. She said she did not want to take my bed, and I told her she was not taking it. I was offering it. That only made her look sadder. "Why?" she asked. "Because it's late, and you're exhausted." "No," she said, setting the mug carefully between us. "Why do you always volunteer to be uncomfortable before anyone even asks?" Marin held my question in the air between us like she was deciding whether it deserved an answer or a weapon. Why did I always volunteer to be uncomfortable before anyone asked? The easy response would have been another joke, something about Catholic guilt despite not being Catholic, or my lifelong commitment to terrible couches, but the truth was uglier and simpler. I had learned early that if I offered enough, asked for little enough, and made myself useful before anyone could be disappointed, people stayed longer. Not forever, but longer. My father came and went by mood and weather. My mother rewarded quiet helpfulness with exhausted affection. Marin, without meaning to, had taught me a different version of the same lesson. She came to me when she was hurt, and I loved being trusted so much that I pretended it did not ache when she healed and left with someone else. I looked at the couch instead of at her and said, "Because it keeps things simple." Marin's face softened, but not kindly. More like she had caught me lying to myself in a language she understood. She crossed her arms, which would have been more intimidating if she were not barefoot in my kitchen at 1 a.m, still wearing a dress that looked too expensive for my scratched floor. "It doesn't keep things simple," she said. "It keeps you out of reach." I laughed once, too dry. "That's a dramatic diagnosis for a sleeping arrangement." She did not smile. I'm serious. That was the problem with Marin. She could joke with a knife in her hand and still know exactly when to put it down. She said she would not take the bedroom if I was offering it like penance, and when I told her that was ridiculous, she simply lifted one eyebrow and asked if it was. I could have argued, but arguing with someone who had known you at 13 was like trying to forge your own signature in front of a bank teller. So I gave up and told her she could have the couch, the bedroom, half the floor, or the fire escape if she wanted to be poetic. She said the couch was fine, but only if I stopped acting like she was a crisis file I had to close before morning. I found an old Hawthorne Marquis sweatshirt in the hall closet, the faded black one from a fundraiser 5 years earlier, and handed it to her with the warning that it was clean but emotionally unimpressive. She took it and said that sounded perfect for me. A few minutes later, she came out of the bathroom with the sweatshirt swallowing most of the dress beneath it, sleeves pulled over her hands, hair loosened around her face. I immediately became very interested in adjusting the thermostat. Marin noticed. Of course she did. Are you checking the heat or avoiding eye contact? She asked. I told her both could be true. And she laughed. But the laugh turned quiet when she sat at one end of the couch and tucked her feet underneath herself like she had done 100 times in my mother's living room when we were younger. I sat at the other end, far enough to be decent, close enough to feel the old gravitational pull of her. The ring flashed once when she adjusted the sweatshirt sleeve. I used it like a guardrail. For a while, we watched the city smear itself against the windows. She asked about the theater, and I told her the balcony still leaked over Row G if the rain came sideways. That one donor insisted the ghost of a 1920s actress hated him personally, and that Graham Pike had nearly lost a fight with a fog machine during a rehearsal. Marin smiled into the sleeve of my sweatshirt, and I felt absurdly proud for giving her a moment where Brennan did not exist. Then she asked if I liked being surrounded by old things, and I told her old things were honest about their damage. They creaked, cracked, leaked, and demanded repair without pretending to be effortless. She looked at me for a long second and said Brennan liked new lobbies because every surface reflected him back correctly. I did not say anything, and that silence invited more truth than any question could have. Marin told me the dinner had been at the Alder House, one of her hotel clients, and Brennan had arrived already irritated because her presentation ran long. Not visibly irritated, never that. He just placed a hand on the back of her chair, smiled at the table, and translated her passion into safer language until everyone thanked him for clarifying. The way she described it made my anger quiet instead of loud. Loud anger would have let me feel righteous. Quiet anger made me listen. She said that when she talked about making the hotel feel less sterile, more human, Brennan cut in and joked that Marin liked to romanticize chipped paint and emotional lighting. The table laughed. She laughed too, because that was what trained women did when the insult came gift-wrapped as charm. Later, when she corrected him privately, he told her she was tired and sensitive, and that he loved her imagination, even when it ran away with her. She said that last sentence with an imitation of his polished voice so exact I could almost see him, and then she stopped because the impression had cost her more than she expected. I asked, carefully, if he always spoke to her like a brand he was managing. She stared at the dark television screen, where both of us appeared as blurred shapes. Only when I forget to manage myself first, she said. I wanted to tell her to leave him. The words were right there, reckless and hot, waiting to make me into exactly the problem I was trying not to become. But wanting her free was not the same as wanting her for myself, and the honest truth was that I wanted both. That made me careful, maybe too careful. I asked if she felt safe with him, and she looked offended for 1 second, then tired. She said yes, physically, and added that she hated how often women had to make that distinction before anyone took the rest seriously. I nodded because I understood the correction. Brennan did not have to raise a hand to make a room smaller. He only had to keep moving the walls inward and call it concern. Marin rubbed at her forehead with the cuff of my sweatshirt and said she was probably being unfair, that weddings made everyone strange, that maybe she was taking one dinner and turning it into a referendum on her entire life. Her voice had started doing that thing again, defending the person who hurt her before anyone else had the chance. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and asked the question before I could sand the edges off it. Did you feel small tonight? Marin went still. Not surprised exactly. More like I had opened a drawer she had been standing in front of for years. Her eyes stayed on the window, but I watched her throat move once. Yes, she said, finally. And the worst part is, I knew how to be small. I knew exactly where to put my hands, how softly to laugh, when to stop talking, how to make him look generous for letting me have opinions. She tried to smile at me, but it failed. That sounds insane when I say it out loud. I shook my head. No, it sounds practiced. That was when her eyes filled, not with dramatic tears, just a bright thinness she blinked away quickly. She hated being witnessed too closely. She always had. But instead of changing the subject, she said I was the only person who asked questions that did not already have a preferred answer hidden inside them. Somewhere after 2, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She insisted she was not tired, then drifted off mid-sentence while explaining why old theaters smelled better than new hotels. Her head tipped against the back of the couch first, then slowly, almost trustingly, landed on my shoulder. Every muscle in my body went stupidly alert. I did not move. I barely breathed. The apartment settled around us, radiator ticking, bakery vents humming below, Marin's hair brushing the side of my neck with each slow breath. I told myself it meant nothing. People leaned when they were tired. Childhood friends shared couches. Engaged women could fall asleep beside men they trusted without detonating anyone's life. But my hand, resting uselessly on my own knee, wanted to cover hers. That wanting was the most honest thing in the room, and I hated it for arriving before she was ready to understand what she wanted from me. She woke, after maybe 10 minutes, disoriented and close enough that her cheek nearly brushed mine when she lifted her head. For 1 second, neither of us moved. Her eyes dropped to my mouth, and then back to my face. So fast I could have pretended I imagined it if I had not spent years becoming an expert in impossible hope. I shifted away first. Just a few inches, just enough to make the air safer, and I saw the flicker in her expression. Hurt, quickly hidden. She pulled the sweatshirt sleeves over her fingers and said, lightly, that she had apparently lost the ability to sit upright like an adult. I told her it was late. I told her she was exhausted. I told her tomorrow would make more sense. With every sentence, I watched her retreat behind that polished little nod Brennan probably mistook for agreement. Then she looked down at the ring on her hand and said maybe Brennan was right about one thing. Maybe she did make things bigger than they were. I heard my own voice answer before fear could stop me. Maybe everyone else has just been asking you to make yourself smaller. I wish I could say the sentence changed everything immediately, that Marin looked at me, understood herself, understood me, and the whole impossible night became clean enough to hold. Life almost never works that generously. Instead, she sat very still in my sweatshirt with her hands tucked into the sleeves, staring at the dark window like my words had made a sound somewhere inside her that she was not ready to answer. After a while, she whispered that I should not say things like that unless I meant them. I told her I did mean it, and that was exactly why I should probably shut up. She laughed then, but it broke in the middle, and I had to look away because there are certain kinds of hurt that make you want to reach for someone before you have earned the right. So I did the safer thing. I told her she should sleep, and this time she did not argue. She stayed on the couch, curled into the corner with a blanket pulled up under her chin, while I sat in the chair across from her pretending to read an old theater maintenance report until the same paragraph began to look like a hostage note. Sometime before dawn, I must have fallen asleep too, because I woke with a stiff neck, a numb shoulder, and Marin veiled tucked against my side like she had crossed the room in her sleep and trusted me with the evidence. The blanket had slipped halfway to the floor. Her head rested against my chest, one hand curled lightly in the fabric of my shirt, and my arm, traitorous and apparently more honest than I was, had settled around her shoulders. For a few seconds, I did not move. I watched pale morning light push through the blinds and spread itself over the apartment, softening the hard edges of the night. Marin's face looked younger without performance on it. Not innocent exactly, because neither of us were young enough for that kind of lie, but unguarded in a way I had not seen since we were teenagers hiding on my back porch after her parents fought. I told myself to wake her gently, to create space before the moment became something neither of us could explain. Then she shifted, breathed in, and pressed closer before opening her eyes. Her first expression was not panic. That was what ruined me. For one tiny, unprotected second, she looked peaceful. Then the world came back to her in pieces. My couch, my shirt beneath her hand, her ring, the night before, the wedding waiting somewhere outside my apartment like an unpaid bill. She sat up too fast and nearly took me with her because her fingers were still caught in my shirt. "Oh, God," she said, voice rough from sleep. "Please tell me I did not climb you like a rescue ladder." I looked down at my wrinkled shirt and said I preferred to think of myself as historically supportive architecture. She covered her face with both sleeves and made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. "This is exactly why I should not be allowed to have feelings after midnight." I said feelings after midnight were a known civic hazard, especially near public transportation, and she peered at me through her fingers with a smile that tried to be embarrassed and became something warmer instead. That warmth nearly pulled me under. Her hair was messy around her face, the sweatshirt had slipped wide at one shoulder, and the domestic wrongness of her being there felt more right than anything in my apartment had felt in years. I stood too quickly and announced that I was making breakfast, which was a bold claim for a man whose breakfast skills peaked at toast and moral support. Marin watched me from the couch like she knew exactly why I had fled to the kitchen and decided, mercifully, to let me have the illusion. I burned the first slice of toast, cracked an egg badly enough to leave shell in the pan, and dropped a butter knife with a clatter that made her laugh for real. Not the hotel dinner laugh, not the controlled social laugh. The old Marin laugh, bright and startled and a little wicked, the one that used to make teachers lose their place and boys decide they were in love with her before they knew what that meant. "You run an entire historic theater," she said, walking over to rescue the eggs, "and yet breakfast has defeated you." I told her the theater did not require me to flip anything before coffee. She nudged me aside with her hip, gentle but certain, and said maybe old buildings were easier because they had the decency to announce when they were falling apart. We ate at the tiny table by the window, her in my sweatshirt, me pretending not to notice, both of us carefully avoiding the phone sitting face down beside her plate. The city outside had turned ordinary again. Buses hissed at the curb, someone downstairs shouted about a delivery, and the bakery below sent up the smell of cinnamon and yeast like the world had not nearly shifted overnight. Marin picked at the edge of her toast for a long time before she said she had lied. I looked at her, and she shook her head quickly, not letting me misunderstand. "Not about coming here," she said. "About the train." I set my mug down. She kept her eyes on the toast as if it might help her be brave. She said the train had been there when she reached the platform. Doors open, lights on, people inside staring at their phones. The whole easy path back to Brennan waiting like a polite instruction. She had even stepped forward when the announcement played. Then she saw her reflection in the dark glass, dress perfect, ring bright, face arranged into someone who could go back and explain herself calmly, and something in her body just refused. She described it quietly, without drama, which somehow made it worse. She said she stood there until the doors chimed. She watched them close. She watched the train pull away with everyone else's night continuing on schedule. Then she stayed on the platform holding her shoes, feeling stupid and strangely relieved, because for the first time all evening, nobody was moving her toward the correct answer. I asked what she did next, though I already knew. Marin looked at me then, and the honesty in her face made the small kitchen feel too exposed. She said she thought about calling Tessa, then her mother, then a car, then Brennan, and every option felt like being translated into someone else's version of the story. Then she thought of my apartment. Not because it was convenient, not because it was harmless, not because I was the emergency contact people used when they had run out of better ideas. She said she came because this was the first place she imagined being able to breathe. There are moments when hope does not feel bright. It feels dangerous, like standing too close to the edge of a roof and realizing part of you wants to lean forward. I wanted to take her hand. I wanted to tell her I had been waiting years for her to stop walking past me toward men who admired the edited version of her. I wanted to say I loved every unmarketable, inconvenient, too bright part of her, and I had loved them before Brennan ever learned how to pronounce her clients' names. But she was still wearing his ring. She had slept 3 hours. Her whole life was shaking. So I did the thing I knew how to do, the thing I hated even as I chose it. I protected her from me. When she said, very softly, that maybe she had compared every man she dated to the person who knew her before she became impressive, I cut in before the sentence could become a bridge neither of us could uncross. I told her not to say anything she might regret after coffee, after sleep, after the world got loud again. The hurt on her face was immediate and quiet. She looked down, nodded once, and I knew I had done exactly what I always did, called it honor when it was partly fear. Before I could fix it, her phone rang. Brennan's name lit the screen, elegant as a threat. Marin stared at it through 3 full vibrations, then answered on speaker without asking me to leave, which felt like its own decision. Brennan's voice came through calm and careful, asking if she was all right, saying her parents were concerned, reminding her about brunch, telling her they could still make it if she came back soon. He never raised his voice. He did not have to. Then he asked if Callum was involved, and hearing my name in his mouth made the kitchen feel suddenly colder. Marin's eyes lifted to mine. For a moment, I thought she would explain me away. Instead, she said she was safe, she was thinking, and she was not coming to brunch. Brennan paused just long enough for the silence to become punishment, then said they would discuss this when she was ready to be reasonable. After she ended the call, neither of us spoke. Marin took one slow breath, then another, as if she were teaching her body that the ceiling had not collapsed. Her hand moved to the ring. She turned it once, twice, the small stone catching the morning light with obscene brightness. I said her name, but she shook her head, not at me, at the voice in her head that was already building arguments, excuses, damage control, family disappointment, Brennan's wounded patience, all of it. Then she slid the ring from her finger, carefully, like it was heavier than metal had any right to be. She placed it in the center of my kitchen table between the chipped mug and the ruined toast, and when she finally looked at me, her eyes were scared but clear. She said she needed 1 hour where nobody told her what that choice was supposed to mean. For 1 hour, I did exactly what Marin asked, which was both easier and harder than it sounded. I did not tell her what removing the ring meant. I did not tell her it meant she was free, or that it meant she was ending the engagement, or that it meant she had finally chosen the version of herself I had been selfishly waiting to see again. I also did not touch the ring, though it sat in the middle of my kitchen table like a tiny, expensive dare. Marin paced my apartment in my theater sweatshirt, sometimes stopping at the window, sometimes picking up the chipped mug and putting it down again, sometimes looking at her bare finger as if the absence had become louder than the diamond ever was. I made coffee because tea felt too gentle for the morning we were having, and when I handed her a cup, she said she felt like she had stepped out of a moving car and everyone expected her to review the landing. I told her she did not have to review anything yet. She smiled faintly and said that was exactly the kind of answer that made me dangerous. The hour lasted 23 minutes. Then someone knocked on my door with the kind of confidence that meant they had already decided they were allowed inside. Marin closed her eyes. "That is either my cousin or my consequences," she said. I opened the door to find Tessa Virio standing in the hallway, wearing running shoes, a cropped rain jacket, and the expression of a woman who had been awake long enough to become everyone's problem. Tessa was Marin's younger cousin, technically, but she operated more like a small private investigator with better eyeliner. She looked me up and down, glanced past me into the apartment, saw Marin in my sweatshirt, saw the ring on the table, then looked back at me. "Well," she said, "the family group chat is going to need oxygen." Marin stepped into view and told Tessa not to start. Tessa lifted both hands. She said she was not starting anything. She was simply observing that Marin had vanished from brunch. Brennan was using complete sentences without contractions, which meant he was furious, and Aunt Lila had already typed the phrase "cold feet" 17 times. I expected Tessa to storm in and demand explanations. Instead, she softened the second she saw Marin's face. She crossed the room, took Marin's hand, and looked at the empty place where the ring had been. For once, Tessa did not make a joke. She asked if Marin was safe, and when Marin said yes, Tessa asked if she was thinking clearly. Marin looked at me before she answered, which was unfair because it made every restrained part of me feel seen and accused at the same time. She said she did not know if clarity was the right word, but she knew she had been unclear for a long time in a way that looked acceptable to everyone else. Tessa absorbed that with a small nod, then finally let her eyes move around my apartment again. The couch blanket, the coffee cups, the sweatshirt sleeves covering Marin's hands, me standing too far away like distance could prove innocence. Okay, Tessa said carefully. I need to ask the ugly question because apparently that is my spiritual gift. Is this about Brennan, or is this about Callum? The question should have offended me. It did not. It only landed exactly where all of us had been avoiding. Marin let go of Tessa's hand and wrapped her arms around herself. She said it was about her first, Brennan second, and me in a way she was afraid to name because naming me would make people call the whole thing panic. Tessa looked at me then, and I hated how quickly she understood my silence. She asked if I had told Marin what I wanted. I almost laughed because wanting was the one thing I had spent the night building fences around. I said Marin did not need my feelings added to the pile before she had even decided what to do with her life. Tessa stared at me for a long second, then said that sounded noble if you did not listen closely. Marin's mouth twitched despite everything. I told Tessa I had known her since she was 9 and still did not appreciate her accuracy. She said growth was uncomfortable and I should try some. When Tessa pulled me into the hallway a few minutes later under the excuse of asking where the trash chute was, I knew I was walking into a secondary trial. She kept her voice low, but there was nothing soft about it. She said Marin smiled differently around me. Not happier in the easy way people meant when they wanted a romance to fix a problem, but less edited, less arranged for public approval. I told her that was exactly why I had to be careful. Tessa leaned against the hallway wall and asked if careful meant respectful or scared. I said both, because I was too tired to lie well. She nodded like she had been expecting that answer and told me not to mistake stepping aside for kindness if stepping aside was just the cleanest way to avoid being rejected. Before I could respond, she added that Marin did not need a man to rescue her from Brennan, but she also did not need another man deciding on her behalf that his feelings were too dangerous for her to handle. By late afternoon, Marin went with Tessa to change clothes and face part of the family storm, and I went to the Hawthorne Marquee because old theaters did not care about emotional collapse when donor previews were scheduled at 7. Graham Pike found me in the balcony trying to fix a loose aisle light with the focus of a condemned man. Graham had worked at the theater longer than anyone and had the permanent squint of someone who distrusted both ladders and rich people. He watched me tighten the same screw 3 times before saying he assumed the screw had confessed by now. I told him to go bother the ghost. He asked if the ghost had also had the woman he had loved since adolescence spend the night and remove her engagement ring over toast. I nearly dropped the screwdriver. Apparently Tessa had texted him because Tessa believed truth was more efficient when distributed. Graham listened while I gave him the shortest version possible, then said I had a gift for making romance sound like a facilities issue. I told him Marin was engaged, or had been engaged, or was somewhere in the burning wreckage between those words, and that I refused to be the man who pulled her toward me while she was disoriented. Graham nodded as if that made sense, then asked what I would do if she was not disoriented. I had no answer. He took the screwdriver from me and tightened the aisle light himself. Then he said, in that blunt way of his, that waiting for a situation to become perfectly clean was how cowards disguised themselves as gentlemen. I told him I did not want to make her choice harder. He handed the screwdriver back and said maybe her choice was already hard, and maybe the only thing I was making easier was my own escape. I wanted to argue. Instead, I looked down at the lobby, where staff were setting out wine glasses and name cards, building a polished little world for donors who loved history as long as it came with valet parking. Marin arrived at 6:40 in a charcoal dress and low heels, looking composed enough to scare me. Tessa walked beside her like a bodyguard with lipstick. Marin found me near the ticket booth, and for a second, the busy lobby blurred around her. She was not wearing the ring, I noticed. She noticed me noticing. Brennan will be here, she said quietly. My parents, too. I asked if she wanted me to leave, because apparently I was still capable of disappointing both of us. Marin's expression tightened, then steadied. She said no, she wanted me there. And when I warned her that would make everything louder, she said she was tired of only seeing me in private when I was the person who made her feel most real. That sentence took the floor out from under me. I said her name, but before I could find the courage to say anything useful, the lobby doors opened and Brennan Shaw walked in with Marin's parents beside him. calm, elegant, and already owning the room. He crossed the lobby like the evening had been designed around his patients. He greeted donors, kissed Marin's mother on the cheek, shook her father's hand, and then looked directly at Marin. Not at Tessa, not at me, not at the absence of the ring, though I knew he saw it. He only smiled that controlled, public smile and extended his hand toward her as if the night, the train, my apartment, and every unsaid thing between us were just a temporary error waiting to be corrected. Marin stood still. Brennan waited. Across the crowded theater lobby, with everyone beginning to notice, she looked at his hand, then turned her eyes to me. For a few seconds, the whole lobby seemed to hold its breath around that extended hand. It was ridiculous, really, how small the gesture was. Brennan did not raise his voice, did not make a scene, did not drag anyone into the center of the room. He simply stood there in a tailored navy suit with his palm open, looking calm enough for everyone else to feel embarrassed on Marin's behalf if she refused him. That was his talent. He could turn control into courtesy so smoothly that resistance looked like bad manners. I stood near the ticket booth with a stack of donor programs in my hand, suddenly aware of every person watching without admitting they were watching. Marin's mother had one hand at her throat. Her father looked confused in the practical way of men who liked problems with invoices attached. Tessa stood half a step behind Marin, still as a match waiting to be struck. I should have stayed out of it. That was the first instinct, old and polished from years of use. This was Marin's engagement, Marin's family, Marin's decision. If I stepped forward, I could become the story Brennan wanted to tell, the childhood friend who waited too long, the convenient apartment, the old feelings dressed up as concern. So I did not move. I hated myself for it and still did not move. Brennan's gaze slid to me once, not long enough for anyone else to notice, just long enough to let me know he knew exactly where to press. Then he looked back at Marin and said, softly but not privately, that she had had a difficult night, and they did not need to do this in front of everyone. His voice was gentle, his words were reasonable. The effect was a hand on the back of her neck. Marin looked at his offered hand, then at the people around her, then at me. I saw the moment she understood the trap. If she took his hand, the room would relax and swallow everything that had happened. If she refused it, she would become dramatic, unstable, impulsive, maybe cruel. Brennan had built a doorway where every exit made him look patient. But Marin Vale had been walking through other people's doorways for years, and something in her face changed. Not dramatically. No sudden movie courage, no trembling speech. She simply straightened, and the version of her that laughed too softly at polished insults stepped back. "I'm not confused," she said. Her voice was not loud, but the lobby carried sound beautifully because I had spent 3 years fixing the acoustics. Every donor with a wine glass heard her. Brennan's smile held, but his eyes sharpened. He said he was not suggesting she was confused, only that she was overwhelmed. Marin asked him not to translate her. That was when the first true silence hit. Not theater silence, not polite silence, but the kind that makes people suddenly interested in carpet patterns. Her mother whispered her name. Her father took one step forward and then stopped because Tessa, tiny, fearless menace that she was, moved in front of him just enough to make him reconsider. Brennan lowered his hand slowly. "This is not the place," he said, still careful, still calm. Marin nodded once. "You're right. The place was probably last night, when I asked you not to correct me in front of clients and you told me I was tired." A few people turned away as if privacy could be manufactured by looking at the wall. I watched her do it alone because she deserved to know she could. That was what I told myself. Maybe part of it was true, but another part was fear wearing a decent suit. Brennan glanced toward me again, and this time he made sure the room followed his gaze. "Callum," he said, like we were old friends and not two men standing on opposite sides of the same unsaid truth. "I appreciate you giving Marin a place to cool off, but I think you and I both know old history can complicate judgment." There it was. Clean, polite, poisonous. He did not accuse me outright. He did not have to. He only placed the suggestion in the room and let everyone else breathe it in. Marin turned toward him sharply, but before she could speak, Brennan continued that she was vulnerable, that I had always been close to her, and that nobody would blame anyone for mistaking comfort for something more. Nobody would blame anyone. I almost laughed because it was such a generous way to insult all three of us. He was offering me an exit, one where I could nod, step back, become furniture again, and let Marin fight alone under the weight of his careful concern. My mouth went dry. I thought of her on my couch, asking why I volunteered to be uncomfortable before anyone asked. I thought of Tessa in the hallway, asking if careful meant respectful or scared. I thought of Graham in the balcony, telling me cowards sometimes disguise themselves as gentlemen. Then I looked at Marin, and she was not asking me to save her. She was asking me, without words, not to disappear. I set the donor programs down on the ticket counter. The sound was small, but Marin heard it. Brennan heard it too. I walked toward them slowly because I did not trust myself to do anything dramatic. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth. When I stopped beside Marin, not in front of her, Brennan gave the faintest smile, like I had stepped exactly where he wanted me. Maybe I had, but for once in my life, I was tired of being useful only in ways that cost me the truth. I said Brennan was right about one thing. Old history did complicate judgment. Marin went very still beside me. I kept my eyes on her, not on him, because the next words belonged to her more than they belonged to the room. I said I had loved her quietly for years, and I had been so afraid of turning that love into pressure that I kept pretending it was just loyalty. My voice did not sound heroic. It sounded rough, exposed, almost embarrassingly human. But I would rather lose you honestly, I said, than keep standing here acting like I only know how to be useful. No one moved. Graham, from somewhere near the bar, muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, "Finally," and Tessa made a small noise halfway between a laugh and a sob. Marin looked at me as if the room had fallen away, as if every year I had swallowed the sentence had suddenly appeared between us and she was reading them one by one. Brennan's face tightened, the charm cracking just enough to show the anger beneath. He said this was exactly what he meant, that I had taken advantage of a vulnerable moment, that I had waited until she was emotionally unstable and then made myself the obvious refuge. The words hit me where he intended them to, because they were the ones I had used against myself all night. But Marin stepped forward before I could answer. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She said Brennan did not get to call her vulnerable just because she had stopped obeying the story he preferred. Then she turned to me. Her eyes were bright, but not uncertain. "I didn't choose your apartment because it was safe," she said. "I chose it because it was yours." The sentence moved through me so cleanly that for a second I forgot we were in public. Every version of myself that had believed he was the backup, the emergency contact, the man women trusted before choosing someone else, went quiet. Marin reached into the small clutch Tessa must have brought her and took out the ring. She held it toward Brennan, not angrily, not theatrically, just finally. She told him she was sorry for the pain, but she would not let him call this panic so he could keep respecting himself and doubting her. Brennan stared at the ring like it had betrayed him by becoming an object instead of a promise. When he took it, his hand was not as steady as his voice had been. Her parents did not understand immediately. Maybe no parents would have. Her mother cried quietly. Her father asked if they could discuss this somewhere private, and Marin said yes, later, but not if private meant everyone explaining her feelings back to her until she surrendered. Tessa slid her arm through Marin's and stood there like a declaration in red lipstick. Brennan left first. He did not storm out. Men like him rarely gave people the satisfaction. He simply buttoned his jacket, nodded once, to nobody in particular, and walked into the wet Portland night with the ring in his pocket and his version of events already forming behind his eyes. The lobby breathed again, awkwardly, noisily. Someone dropped a wine glass. Graham announced too loudly that historic preservation was emotionally enriching, and several donors laughed because people will accept any doorway out of discomfort if you label it charming. After the preview ended, after Marin spoke briefly with her parents in a side office, after Tessa hugged her hard enough to wrinkle the charcoal dress, I found myself alone with Marin on the empty stage. The ghost light stood between us, a small amber glow in the dark theater. Rows of red seats stretched out like a sleeping audience. Marin had taken off her heels and was holding them by their straps, which made her look suddenly like the girl from every memory I had tried to outgrow. I told her I was terrified. She looked over at me, soft but serious. I said I was terrified she would wake up tomorrow and realize I was part of a night that had gotten too loud. I admitted I was scared she would remember Brennan's life as stable and mine as a mistake with old ticket stubs and bad breakfast. Marin walked closer until the ghost light touched the side of her face. She said tomorrow was exactly why she chose me. For a while, I could not answer her. The stage was too quiet, the kind of quiet that made every honest word feel louder than applause. Marin stood a few feet away from me with her heels dangling from one hand, the ghost light turning the edge of her charcoal dress gold, and I kept thinking about all the years I had imagined impossible versions of this moment. In my imagination, I was always smoother. I said the perfect thing at the perfect time. I became the kind of man who knew how to accept being chosen without looking around for the hidden trapdoor. In real life, my throat tightened, my hands felt useless, and the only thing I managed to say was that tomorrow scared me because tomorrow was where dramatic nights went to become consequences. Marin smiled a little at that, not because it was funny, but because she knew I was telling the truth in the only language I had left. She stepped closer and said tomorrow scared her too, but she was more afraid of going back to a life where she had to make herself easier to approve of. We sat on the edge of the stage like we were 16 again, except now there was a canceled engagement behind us, a lobby full of whispers cooling outside, and a future neither of us was foolish enough to call simple. Marin said she did not want to turn me into proof that leaving Brennan was right. She said if we did this, really did this, she needed it to be because I was Callum, not because I was the opposite of someone else. That mattered. It mattered so much I almost ruined it by telling her she did not owe me anything, because that was still my favorite hiding place. Instead, I said I did not want to be her emergency exit anymore. The words came out rougher than I meant them to, but Marin did not flinch. I told her I wanted the ordinary parts too. Bad mornings, inconvenient honesty, grocery lists, her changing her mind 3 times about dinner, me overthinking where she wanted her books, both of us learning how to be more than a crisis. She leaned her shoulder against mine and said that sounded terrifyingly domestic. I told her I had been called worse by theater donors. That night, she came back to my apartment, but not because she missed a train. Tessa drove her over, honked twice from the curb like a deeply unsubtle blessing, and shouted through the window that nobody was allowed to make tragic decisions before breakfast. Marin rolled her eyes, but her hands were shaking when she unlocked her seatbelt. I saw it and did not comment. Inside my apartment, the ring was gone from the kitchen table, but the space where it had sat still seemed bright. Marin noticed me noticing the absence and said she felt lighter and horrible and relieved and sad, sometimes all in the same breath. I told her that sounded human. She stood in my kitchen for a moment, still in that dress, looking at the chipped mug on the shelf, the tea tin behind the coffee, the old book by the window, all those quiet pieces of evidence I had pretended were practical. Then she asked if she could borrow the theater sweatshirt again. I said yes, and this time, when she came back wearing it, I did not look away like wanting her was a crime. We did not pretend the world had become easy by sunrise. Marin woke before me and made coffee so badly that the first sip felt like a personal attack. She was standing at the counter in my sweatshirt, hair messy, face bare, stirring sugar into a mug with the seriousness of a woman negotiating peace terms. When I asked if the coffee was supposed to taste like old pennies and regret, she told me emotional men should be grateful for caffeine in any form. Then she grew quiet and said she was still there, not as a joke, not as a tease, not as a soft little line meant to make the morning romantic. She said it like a promise she was testing with both hands. I walked over slowly, giving her every chance to step back, and she did not. I kissed her in the kitchen with the bad coffee between us and the city waking below, and it felt nothing like stealing. It felt like finally being allowed to stand in the room I had been knocking on for years. The weeks after that were messier than any love story summary makes them sound. Marin canceled venues, returned deposits, cried over a guest list that suddenly looked like a map of everyone she had disappointed, and had 3 brutal conversations with her parents before one of them ended without someone hanging up. Brennan sent 2 long emails, both calm enough to be cruel, and Marin read them with Tessa beside her and me in the next room because she asked me not to carry every hard thing for her. I learned that love was not proving I could absorb all her pain. Sometimes it was staying close enough to be called in and far enough to let her hear her own voice. She rebuilt her work life with a sharper edge, too, stopped letting clients call her instincts charming, and once sent me a message after a meeting that said, "I disagreed out loud, and nobody died." I printed it and taped it inside my locker at the theater until Graham found it and asked if we were now archiving romantic bureaucracy. We also had to learn how to date, which was ridiculous when you had known someone since braces and bad haircuts. Our first official dinner was awkward for exactly 12 minutes because both of us were trying too hard to act like people who had not already changed each other's lives. Marin ordered fries and stole mine anyway, which helped. I took her to the theater after hours and showed her the old dressing rooms where actors had carved initials into the wood, and she said old buildings made sense to her now because they survived by admitting what needed repair. She tucked the unused train ticket behind the old Hawthorne ticket stub on my bookshelf one evening without making a speech about it. I found it later, 2 small pieces of paper leaning together like they had been waiting years for the introduction. When I asked why she kept it, she said it was not a souvenir of the night she left Brennan. It was the night she stopped boarding trains just because everyone expected her to go somewhere. Months passed, and the strange thing was how slowly happiness arrived. Not like fireworks, more like the bakery smell at dawn, creeping up through the floorboards until one day the whole apartment felt warmer. Marin brought over books, and then plants, and then a blue bowl she insisted had always emotionally belonged to my kitchen. I gave her a drawer and only panicked for 47 minutes, which she called major progress. Sometimes she still woke up worried that she had made too much mess. Sometimes I still went quiet when I wanted reassurance, because old habits do not vanish just because someone loves you correctly. But now she would touch my wrist and ask me not to turn into furniture, and I would tell her, badly but honestly, that I wanted her there. That was the real miracle for me. Not that Marin chose me once in a crowded theater lobby, but that she kept choosing me in ordinary rooms afterward. A year later, we took the last train on purpose. It was Marin's idea, because she had a talent for turning old fear into ceremonies nobody else would understand. We rode out to the station where she had once stood in her formal dress, watching the doors close on the life she was supposed to return to. This time, she wore jeans, my jacket, and a smile she did not have to manage. We stood on the platform after midnight, holding hands while the train pulled away without us. I asked if missing it still counted when we had no intention of getting on. She said maybe that was the point. Then she took the old, unused ticket from her pocket, folded it once, and slipped it into my hand. "I didn't miss the last train by accident," she said. "I think I caught the first honest chance to come home. I still keep that ticket behind the theater stub. The chipped mug is still on the shelf, though Marin now claims joint custody. The sweatshirt has become hers through a legal process known as stealing. And every once in a while, usually when the city is wet and silver after midnight, I think about the version of me who believed being useful was the closest he would ever get to being loved. I wish I could tell him that one day, the woman he kept making room for would finally stop at his door, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she knew exactly where she wanted to be. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been someone's safe place for so long that you stopped believing you could be their choice too? Tell me in the comments, because I think more people know that feeling than they admit. And if this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and come back for the next one. Sometimes love does not arrive on time. Sometimes it misses the last train and knocks on the right door instead.